Hi, everyone, and welcome to this live event on LinkedIn and, of course, on StreamYard on Secure by Design across the stack. Thank you so much for joining in. I see a lot of you have already joined in. Uh, this event, I'm coming to you from a slightly different setting than my usual streaming. I'm traveling, I'm just on the road to Black Hat. And next week, we'll be training at Black Hat. We have a whole bunch of trainings that we're doing at Black Hat. I'm doing the one with AWS, Azure, and GCP. So yeah, uh, this is basically me being on the road, just about to get there. I see that some of you are already sending in some messages. Nice to meet you, Mohammed Awais. I'm excited for this too. Thank you so much. So I'm going to jump right into it. I'm not going to spend too much time on getting into precursor and stuff like that. I'm going to jump right into it, and we're going to get into secure by design across the stack. Now, this is going to be more of an introductory session that I'm going to be doing, in the sense that I'm focusing on what it is, what are the different parameters on secure by design, and what are the things you have to do as a company for secure by design. So that's really what I'm going to be focusing on. We're going to keep it short, about 30-40 minutes, and of course we'll have time for questions at any given point in time. I'm going to try and take questions at the end, because I just don't want the flow to be disrupted in the middle. I'll try and take questions in the middle, but I think I should only be able to take questions towards the end of the session. So thanks all of you for joining in. Let's get started, and I'm going to start presenting my screen very soon. Thankfully, I have two screens today, so I'm not worried too much about having to deal with a single screen. Sometimes when I'm traveling, I just have a single screen, but today I do have two screens, thankfully. Anyway, so let's get started with secure by design across the stack. Now, I'm guessing that all of you are here to learn this, because this is something that has become a very important topic. It's become a very important talking point for a lot of us, right? We've been seeing a lot of it. We've been seeing it, in the cybersecurity agency of the US. They've been talking about it a lot. Companies have been talking about it. This has kind of become a very important talking point from 2023, 2024, around this time frame. It's become a very important talking point, and I'm glad it is. I've been talking about this for the last 10 years or so, but I'm glad that a lot of us outside of just myself are talking about it. And I've been doing work around this area for a very long time, and I've been implementing stuff for a very long time for companies. I think I have implemented secure by design in some way, shape, or form for more than 150, 200 companies now, close to around that size, as part of my consulting work for V45. And of course, in AppSecEngineer, we train on a lot of secure by design concepts, be it threat modeling or be it application security, secure code related threat modeling issues. We basically talk about secure by design, even at cloud security and all of that stuff. So generally, secure by design is something I am constantly alluding to, I'm constantly focusing on. So this is a big area as far as I'm concerned. Now, just for those of you, I'm sure some of you are aware of who I am, but for those of you who don't, my name is Abhay. I run two companies. One is AppSecEngineer, which is the training platform, and I also run V45. Now, V45 is the application security services company. We work with some of the world's largest clients on application security services like threat modeling, security architecture review, cloud security assessments, supply chain security assessments, so on and so forth. So we do a lot of work on, right from pen testing to all of these other things that are very, very critical in application security. We are launching a whole bunch of LLM security services, which are at the cutting edge. We're doing a lot of work around the LLM space. So this is something that we're launching pretty soon as well. So look out for content around that as well. Uh, Outside of this, I train. I do a lot of training. AppSecEngineer is something that I built, but even before that, I used to train at several events like Black Hat and DEF CON and OWASP. This year, in fact, I'm training at several places. I'm back on the road, training quite a bit. I am training at Black Hat, which is next week, and I'm also training at BrewCon in in Belgium on DevSecOps. I'm training at in Black Hat, Middle East in Saudi. I'm training, I think, also at I'm also training at OWASP in SF next month. So there's a lot of stuff happening. There's a lot of interesting things happening around the training space. So I started off, for those of you who don't know me, I started off my career in offensive security. and then I largely now focus on scaling application security. So one of the big things that I talk about, and in terms of scaling application security, is secure by design, right? So secure by design is really something that you need when you want to scale application security. If you're a company that is shipping applications fast, you're delivering applications multiple times a day, you're delivering multiple applications at scale, you're running them at scale, secure by design is something that you need to do. You need to think about this from a very serious perspective, right? So this is something that you want to do, you want to be able to think about, and that is something that I'm going to be talking about today. All right. So with that in mind, let's look at the agenda. The agenda is going to be pretty straightforward and simple. It's going to be what is secure by design, right? And we're going to look at the CISA, so the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA of the US, has actually launched something called the Secure by Design approach, and they've also launched something called a Secure by Design pledge. I'm going to talk about both these things, and I'm going to talk about why this is important, simply because I think that this is the first step that some agency, or at least in my view, as far as I know, this is the first step that some agency is taking to actually address this problem in a proactive way, rather than just coming up with fines and penalties and stuff like that. I think what CISA is doing is very good, because they're actually coming up with very specific parameters that is considered secure by design, and they are advocating this across the industry. They're making companies sign a pledge that says, hey, I want you should be secure by design, I want to be. It's a voluntary pledge, of course, at this point. They're also enforcing it through policy action, where they're NIST, SSDF and stuff like that. They are talking about secure design, secure by design. So this is something that is happening, and I think this is going to soon start making its way into software contracts. So if you are building software for someone, it could be the government or it could be somebody else, I think you're going to see a situation in the near to long-term future where you need to your security of your application is probably going to have some kind of is going to need some kind of liability statements based on secure by design. I think that's very important. So if you are building applications, if you're a SaaS company, if you're selling applications, third-party applications to customers, then this is going to be something that is very important for you to think about as well. So we look at secure by design across the stack. Now, when I say across the stack, the first thing that comes to mind when I say across the stack is, hey, let's talk about cloud, let's talk about apps, let's talk about all that. Yes, we will be talking about that. But really, across the stack for me is these three things: people, process, technology, right? Because end of the day, you want technology, in my view, especially when it comes to secure by design, is not the challenge. It's not the challenge, actually. The biggest challenge is people, then comes process, putting a process around those people, and then of course the technology. Those, in that order, the challenges really start from the people. People are the biggest challenges. Getting people aligned to this is the biggest challenge. So this is going to be something that I'll be talking about, and we'll be looking at some approaches. And this is also, a lot of it has been inspired by the CISA Secure by Design document, which is a very useful document to read. It gives you a lot of structure. If your company is looking to implement Secure by Design, this is something that can help you. And of course, if you need some help, we can always help you as well. Now, let's talk about what this is. Now, I'm going to be using a lot of mind maps. I love mind maps. I don't know if you do. Anyone here a mind map fan? I'm sure there are a few people who love using mind maps. The reason I like using mind maps is because it clarifies my thought process a lot better. It makes it simple for me to understand, and also I think makes it simple for a lot of other people to understand. So first of all, let's talk about what secure by design is. Now, secure by design really is all of these things, right? So basically, the idea is that you have some kind of a proactive approach to security where you are by default or by design resilient against security issues, right? That's basically what you are doing with secure by design. You are coming up with some proactive steps or proactive approach where you are by design, from the get-go, from the outset, by default, you are secure. You have included security in that particular proactively from that perspective, right? So that is what secure by design is. Now, does that mean it makes you invulnerable? No, it does not. It essentially means that you're considering security in a very deep way in your application development process, in your application deployment process, in all of the processes around your application, you are considering security or designing in security or baking in security in a way that is native to the application, and it's not this bolted on thing that a lot of us do, right? One of the big problems with typical security practices is that they're bolted on towards the end, and most people don't consider them upfront. The idea is that you proactively consider security. You include security by default. In terms of, when I say batteries included in the second point, what I mean is that you give them security capabilities that are enabled out of the box. Now, to give you an example of what security features are enabled out of the box, is this was sometime. So I used to write a lot of code in Django. I don't know how many of you have written code in Django, which is a very popular Python um, web framework. When I wrote code in Django, one of the things when I started writing code, this was back in 2012, 2013, I started writing code in Django. And one of the first things I noticed was that this web framework comes with security batteries included. It came with CSRF protection out of the box. It came with SQL injection protection out of the box. It came with cross-site scripting prevention out of the box. It came with a lot of security features out of the box, which was a huge departure from the norm back in the day, right? So in 2012, 2013, this was, for me, it was a huge change because a lot of the Java frameworks back then didn't really consider all of this stuff at all. They used to have security capabilities, but you had to enable them, or you had to configure them. You had to do a lot to actually get them to work in many cases, right? So batteries included essentially means that it ships with the security features and they come enabled by default. So that is something that you see with Secure by Design. The third thing is defense in depth, right? Now, when you're looking at Secure by Design, you are thinking about defense in depth. You are thinking about redundancy. You are thinking about what if something happens to this, and this is not the. So you're thinking about, how do I create a layered approach to security so that if this control fails, there's always something that is compensating for this, right? So that's really what defense in depth is about. And this is something that you are considering in Secure by Design. And we look at examples of how you should consider this as well. Secure defaults. Now, when I say batteries included in secure defaults, they kind of, in some ways, mean the same thing, but it also means that you give your customers options to only use secure defaults, right? Which means you ship with strong password requirements. That is a secure default. You ship with multi-factor authentication built in and should be enabled out of the box. You ship with strong passwords or administrative use, whatever. I'm just giving you examples of secure defaults. You ship with them by default so that the user does not have to enable them with some configuration parameter later. It's enabled by default. The user has to, if needed, disable them, and you give them enough warnings that they know that by disabling them they're doing something wrong. It's like, I don't know how many of you are using Amazon S3 off late. I'm using a lot of Amazon S3 at least over the last 2-3 weeks because I'm building the training for our Black Hat course next week, and in that you'll see that S3 today versus S3 before is a huge change, right? S3 today does not allow you to enable public access to objects by default. Even when you're trying to enable public access, it tells you that, are you sure you want to do this? This is what is going to happen. It gives you a whole bunch of warnings before you can take that action. That, in my opinion, is secure default, because by default, S3 is not allowing you to shoot yourself in the foot. And that's really what you want from Secure by Design, right? So secure defaults is something that you provide as options to your customers that they can use as defaults, and it comes shipped with those options. So that's really what you want with secure defaults. And the last thing is, of course, security embedded at each layer of the SDLC. Now, the SDLC is something that we'll talk about in a couple of places in this in this event today. And you'll see that embedding security across the SDLC gives you a lot of value in terms of Secure by Design, because it allows you to catch security issues early and often. That's what you want. You want to catch security issues as early as possible in the cycle, because when you catch security issues early, you're able to fix them early. And when you fix them early, you don't ship with those security issues. And that's really what you want when it comes to security embedded at each layer of the SDLC. Right. So this, in my view, is Secure by Design. And this is something that adheres. If you look at the CISA document as well, you'll see that this adheres extensively to that view as well. So this is quite clear in terms of what secure by design is. Now let's get into why though. Why do we do this? Now we have done this simply because the attacks today, or the security incidents that are happening today are getting an ecosystem size issue, right? It's basically becoming an entire ecosystem level attack. So if you look at attacks like SolarWinds, which happened in 2020, 2021, if you look at the Okta breach, which happened more recently, where attackers compromised the support environment or the support application to Okta. They used the HTTP archives, and then they were able to gain access to Okta customer networks and so on, because they were able to compromise that. So that is an example of a pretty large breach, right? So Okta was a huge breach because this resulted these support tickets that so they were able to compromise one single or a few people's emails and third party support agents emails, and through that they were able to compromise a whole bunch of customer data. So this is an example of ecosystems that are being compromised, right? So Okta is a huge ecosystem. Okta is an identity provider for some of the largest companies in the world. Not just the largest companies in the world, it's probably the most popular identity provider. And compromising Okta leads to an ecosystem of other applications and organizations that are compromised, right? So this is something that you'll see. Sisense had a very similar thing. Sisense is this product that is used to connect different products to different products. So you can essentially say that, okay, I'm getting some data from my CRM and I want to push it into my marketing engine or whatever it is. Sisense allows you to do that and get some insights and all of that stuff. Sisense's secrets were compromised from their GitLab repository, where their customer sensitive information was also compromised, and people had to, because Sisense not only had customer data, but they had customer secrets. Sisense is used to authenticate to different tools, so all those secrets are loaded into Sisense, which means that the entire ecosystem of authentication credentials had to be changed because of Sisense. So this was another breach that happened this year. This happened in 2024, and it was a more recent breach. And of course, more recently, the Snowflake breach also gives you an idea. This was, of course, not really Snowflake's fault, because this was really where customers were not using multi-factor authentication. That was a feature enabled in Snowflake. They were not using multi-factor authentication, and as a result, they were compromised. Attackers used credential stuffing to compromise Snowflake environments, and using a lot of customer Snowflake environments were compromised because they were not using multi-factor authentication, and so on. So if you see the causes of these breaches, the different ones that I spoke about, some of them range from customer issues where your customers are not enabled certain security features, to the fact where there have been issues with the provider, there have been issues with the provider supply chain, there have been issues with different aspects of the provider, right? So either way, the problem remains that you are essentially going after ecosystems today, and attackers are going after ecosystems, and this is something that we'll see quite a bit of. While the CrowdStrike issue was not an attack per se, you'll see how ecosystem scenarios behave, right? It literally brought down a massive chunk of the internet because CrowdStrike was on so many machines, and they had an issue with the way they tested it, and they rolled it out, and that as a result it caused several systems to go down, Microsoft systems to go down, including Azure, apparently. So that is something that happened. And this is what is happening. We are looking at ecosystem breaches. And the only way we can prevent against ecosystem breaches is by thinking about security at the design, from a design perspective, and designing security into the application, baked into the application, baked into each application that we develop. Because you never know, okay, a lot of us, this happens to me a lot of times, right? A lot of people, when you look at an environment, you look at an application, they don't think about that application in, oh, is this secure or insecure terms. They think about it, okay, this may be, yeah, this is a support ticket application or support management application. This is not very critical from a security perspective. But you'll realize that every application that you're using has an impact because it is linked to other applications and users and so on and so forth. And from there, there's always a way to make your, to get access to other information inside your organization. So it's not, there is this this perspective that there are applications that can be secure, applications that don't need to be secure, is really gone. Because even if it's a SaaS application, I've seen a lot of people take SaaS applications very casually and say, this is a SaaS application, they're doing whatever they're doing. But the point is that there needs to be uh, a secure by design approach across the board, and this needs to apply to SaaS applications as well. Anyway, so let's look at, once we looked at the breaches, we are going to look at how to do this. So first of all, there are really three ways that I'm going to talk about how to do this. What are the different ways to do this? And I'm going to provide some very specific approaches to do this, specific ways to do this. First of all, own the security outcomes for yourself and for your customer, right? So you need to, when I say own the security outcomes, you look at what it is to own the security outcomes. It essentially means that you need to control the security experience for your product and for your customer, right? So this essentially means that just like you control the user experience or the quality experience of your application, you also need to control the security experience. You need to own the security experience. And this is a very important point. A lot of people don't own this. They think of security as a third party problem. So when they deploy it at their customers, yes, it's the customer's problem. When you're deploying it on SaaS, it's a deployment problem and it's a customer feature usage problem. Now, the point is that the idea is that you have to own that. Just like you own user experience or you use user interfaces, you own the quality, you own the very aspect of how the application works. That is ownership, right? Now, the security, unfortunately, is never owned. It's always kind of passed down the line, and the buck is always passed down. And that's a problem, because when security is not owned, it becomes ignored. And when it becomes ignored, it becomes pointless, right? So you have to own the security outcomes. Second thing is, of course, fostering transparency, accountability, and traceability. We'll talk about this as well. These are things that you need to do, and we look at how to do it. And finally, of course, you need to create a culture from the top. Again, I can't stress on the third point enough, simply because secure by design only works when it comes from the top, right? If the people at the top are not aligned to security or your visions for security, then there is no way this is going to be permeated down the line. There's no way it's going to happen, right? So this culture of security by design or secure by design has to come from the top, and we look at how that can be done as well. Let's start off with the first one, which is owning security outcomes. Now, I like the way CISA has divided this, and I borrowed from how they have. So they basically come up with three different parameters: secure default, secure development, and pro security business practices, right? So these are very nice, and I like the way they thought about it. And I basically use that to develop a set of controls for owning security outcomes. So basically, let's look at some of the things that you can own. So this is, imagine that you want to own the security outcomes for your application. How can you do that? What are the things that you need to do to own this experience, right? First of all, things like credentials, making sure there are strong credentials, MFA. The other thing you need to do is reduce the hardening requirement. Now, this third point here on top is actually looks like, what are you talking about? Why should you reduce hardening? You should actually increase hardening, right? No, but if you think about it, you shouldn't increase hardening, right? I remember this. I remember a time where we used to go in and do hardening reviews. I used to go and do for a lot of the payment card industry. I used to do it for banks, and I used to do it for so many different companies. I used to do hardening reviews. I used to do hardening reviews for database products, hardening reviews for application servers, etc., etc. The hardening guidelines were so big, it was like running into hundreds and hundreds of pages. The reason for that is there were so many different security features that you could enable or disable, that you needed to essentially publish all of this and basically say that, look, I've given you all the stuff, you need to figure it out. Now, more often than not, that would never get done, simply because it was so big, so complicated, so extensive, that hardening would never get done. They would harden some parts of it, and then they would just basically not bother about a lot of the rest. So the idea here, when you're talking about secure by design, is to reduce the hardening requirement, which means that it comes pre-shipped with secure features, and the hardening should be the customer engagement to what they need to do to harden something is very limited. It should not be huge. And that's really a success of secure by design if the hardening requirements are limited and if the customer has limited say in the security posture of that product. right? So that is really owning the security outcome, right? Owning the security outcome really comes from the fact that you can achieve this. The other thing that you want to do is create secure config templates and modules. Now, this is especially true in the infrastructure as code world, right? With things like Terraform and stuff, we're all creating modules. I remember I see this a lot with my customers as well, big cloud companies or cloud database companies or e-commerce and so on and so forth. A lot of them essentially create modules for Terraform. They create modules for different types of infrastructure as code requirements that they have, and that a lot of times those modules are not tested for security, they're not validated for security, and they're just there. And a lot of times, just by using that module, maybe you may be running into a lot of vulnerabilities, and this can cause a lot of problems because that module is used by thousands of developers internally, and that might be something that can have a huge impact on their security. So secure config templates, when you're creating these templates itself, having secure configuration parameters and modules will help you achieve secure by design. Discourage legacy unsafe features. This is, of course, a given. You need to essentially stop asking them to use certain things like username, password. Ask them to use things like authenticate with social logins or authenticate with SSO or stuff like that, and discourage the use or have them use passwordless and so on and so forth. These are things, examples of what you can do. When it comes to secure development, you'll see that these are all the good things that I keep talking about, right? I talk about this pretty much all the time on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever. I talk about this quite extensively, Secure SDLC, which is basically, in my view, DevSecOps, right? Because what you're doing is you're embedding security across the cycle. You're testing it through automated, mostly automated, in some cases manual means. You're creating a feedback loop, and you are essentially giving some kind of a security feedback based on that embedded process that you're doing. So secure SDLC is something that talks about, one of the things it talks about in a big way is training devs on secure software development, because this is an area that, of course, that I am very passionate about, and I'm sure some of you know this. Uh, Developer security training today is broken irretrievably, because what has happened is that everything is brought down to a list of terrible do's and don'ts, and nobody really understands why they're doing it. Nobody understands why they're not doing it. It becomes very boring. Now, training devs essentially means that you need for them to understand the details in a lot more depth. And this is something that I have done a lot of work on in my life. I continue to do a lot of work on through AppSecEngineer. And this is something that I think is very important. And I'm glad CISA has brought this up as part of their secure by design documentation that they have. The other thing that I really like here, aside from the fact that all of the other stuff like security for libraries and supply chain vulnerability management, I like the fact that they have brought in the whole incident response, the security orchestration and response part, the threat hunting part, simply because that tends to get kind of a secondary treatment when it comes to application security, right? Or when you don't think of that as secure by design, right? A lot of people don't think of it as secure by design. A lot of people think of it as, oh, this is something that needs to be done, but it's not really an application thing, right? But it very much is, because your application security parameters can deeply influence the way you write your incident response scripts, your threat hunting scripts, or your SOAR playbooks and stuff like that. This can help quite extensively in sorting out your incident response, or your security operations in terms of your SecOps, or in terms of threat hunting that you do. This can help quite a bit, and building this out and testing this out against your already secure by design application can help quite a lot, because it can validate a lot of the theories that you have around your application security. So this is something that you need to think about quite extensively. Outside of this, one of the things that CISA talks about, and I think I'm very much in agreement with, is uh, pro security business practices, which is basically don't charge extra for things like logging to be included, SSO to be included. A lot of vendors do this. They add this security tax on a lot of their products, and because of that security tax, people don't buy the product, or they don't buy that version of the product because it's more expensive, and because of that, a lot of security issues happen, right? Because they don't have multi-factor or SSO or something like that, doesn't work. So they want the industry at large to eliminate these hidden security taxes that come in the form of additional payment for SSO, additional payment for logging, stuff like that. This is something that I find very useful. So as you can see, secure by design is not just doing technology stuff. It's also doing technology stuff, but it's really about aligning people. In this case, you'll see that aligning people happens in multiple ways. Two, aligning process around things like your vulnerability management or training or your SDLC and stuff like that. And third, getting the technology in place, which is through multiple ways, as you can see that I've described here. So it's very, very important for you to think about all these three things holistically and not think about just the technology piece. This has to be an alignment of all these three things for it to work. Right. So transparency, accountability, and traces. This is something that the CISA talks about in Secure by Design as well, where they talk about this again in three parameters: secure default, secure product development, and pro security business practices. So one of the things they talk about, and I think this is kind of a level two thing, right? So I would say level one is owning the security. So if you think about it like you think about it with ASVS, something like a maturity model or a verification standard, I would say the first level would be owning the security outcomes. The second level would be traceability, accountability, etc., etc. The third level would be your management. Of course, the management thing kind of has to start as well, but I think that it goes to the next level when it comes to this stuff, and it goes to another level when it goes to the start at the top stuff, right? So I think these points are very valid. I want to bring out a couple of things here that popped out to me, especially when I was prepping for this. A few things that I like to think about, especially when it comes to transparency and accountability, is the publish high-level threat models point. This is actually very cool, and it's very, very important because your products internally or externally need to have published threat models with the right artifacts. Now, a lot of people don't know what they are and they don't know what artifacts they need to have. So this is something that you need to work on if you want to really implement secure by design. A lot of this comes from threat modeling. So creating threat modeling, maintaining it, and publishing it gives you not only a lot of value from secure by design, but it also gives you multiple opinions on this, which makes it a lot more, a lot more effective when it comes to secure by design. Supply chain security, SBOMs, and provenance is something that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, especially SBOMs, which is software bill of materials, and the provenance related to that. So this is something that again I would say is important. I think this falls into both categories where you're doing secure product development as part of the ownership. You're owning the experience as well as the traceability and transparency piece. Because one of the things you have to do, I think, and this is going to start happening, and it's also been spoken about in the NIST SSDF and stuff like that, is if you're a vendor, if you're building software, you have to publish SBOMs to your customers, right? You want to publish SBOMs simply because they can validate what is happening, what is the current security posture of your application, and that is transparency, right? You're taking accountability for it. You're able to trace it. It's transparent. So that is something that you want from the transparency elements that you're thinking about. Other than that, I think this is pretty straightforward and easy to understand. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. What I do like is having a secure by design policy and roadmap. That's the last one. If you see the last point, if you see the second point in the pro business security practices, pro security business practices, you'll see secure by design policy and roadmap. Now, this is something that I personally have done for a lot of companies. We've built this out. So what we've done for one company, just to give you an example, is we included security as part of their OKRs, right? So as part of their OKRs, we had them do threat models and add roadmap elements to their OKRs to say that the objective is to reduce account compromises by 60%. How do you do that? What are the key results? Do this, and this, right? We created a roadmap of sorts. So this really helps. I can attest to this personally, that this is great because once you're able to do this, you are able to measure security just like you measure any other aspect of your management process, right? Just like you measure any other aspect of your management process, you are able to measure security. This is, I think, a really powerful thing that you have. And the last point also is very interesting where it says publish secure SDLC results, because a lot of us don't know. I mean, this is also something that I have done in a few places, not necessarily in the same way, but we've implemented this in a few places where we've essentially had things, metrics around the security SDLC or secure SDLC published. Things like, okay, we identified these many vulnerabilities in threat modeling or these many vulnerabilities in SAST that could have become vulnerabilities later, right? Or in the build that we could have become vulnerabilities later. So things like secure SDLC results gives a visibility to everybody in your team, saying that, oh, okay, this is what's happening. This process is actually working. This is doing something. It's reducing our, mean time to remediate, mean time to fix these issues. This is actually doing something. Let's say you're using some kind of source composition analysis tool, and you're able to find these issues in every build. Have those results published from a vulnerability management tool or wherever, because that can tell people that yes, these many vulnerabilities are actually getting caught and not going to prod, or are getting addressed much before they go to prod. So this is something that is a huge visibility creator for security across the business units, if you will, right? So this is something that I like to do. Right. Lastly, I want to talk about this simply because this is useful to know, and this is the lead from the top. So, if there are CISOs, if there are product security heads watching this, I think uh, this is where you can really play a big role, right? Uh, Customer security councils is something that I've seen some vendors start to do, some security software vendors start to do. This is good because the customers give you their input on security, and that's always useful, especially if you are selling to a security specific community that give you a lot of input. Secure by design reports to the board. So this is actually very useful because, again, this needs to be something that is highlighted to the board. A lot of times over uh, we overemphasize breaches, and we overemphasize how we got over a thing, how we fought this fire, right? But somehow people who are doing a job diligently and doing it day in and day out and implementing security day in and day out never get recognized for that work. So I think having a secure by design reporting structure to the board makes a lot of sense, because that will show how many fires that could have happened have been completely put out because we are doing this process. We are following this process down to the T, right? It also helps with compliance because a lot of this directly correlates to positive compliance goals or positive compliance achievement parameters, right? So this is something that I think is a very important thing that you need to do, have reports to the board. Create internal incentives. This is, again, just like you have for security champions, right? Some of you may be working on security champions programs. Secure by design is one of those things you can do as part of your security champions and create incentives as part of that. Because really, incentives here essentially means that people are going above and beyond. Create those incentives for them to do that, right? So again, I link this to things like OKRs and stuff like that, because if you can achieve like 80% of that goal, you should have some incentive. I have some kind of additional training budget or some other type of budget. OKR. So somebody has a question. What does OKR refer to? So this is objectives and key results. So objectives and key results are basically a management tool that helps you drive your what it is that you're working on, what it is that you need to do for a particular team, and it kind of I'm not going to get into the specifics now. It's just a way of managing your business objectives and how you can get those business objectives done. So security also becomes a business objective, and getting it done through this process makes a lot of sense, right? So this is something that leading from the top essentially means, which is basically creating an environment where people do this without having to be forced or having to be, coerced in some ways. This is something that can help when you create the right incentives for people. And creating the right incentives could be anything from additional training budgets to conference budgets to, it could be very simple stuff, slightly more complicated stuff. It really depends on how your organization is set up to handle these things. It could be cash incentives as well. It depends on how you handle it. So finally, conclusions. one, of course, I think that secure by design is going the way of an essential today, right? I think it is going to become part of software security liability, right? So tomorrow people are going to ask you things about, okay, this is already happening, right? Especially with the US federal government, this is already happening, and I'm sure this is going to start becoming bigger and bigger as days go on. Uh, Basically, saying that, look, you are selling software to me, so you have liability of security. So I hope you are meeting secure by design principles. I hope you are achieving NIST SSDF practice, whatever that requirement may be. So this is something that I think is going to happen, and I think it's already happening. Secure by design is the way to build applications, because today you're doing things at scale and at speed, so you want to be able to have some control. The reason why this is very important is simply this, right? People have uh, I've started to see this myself. Companies have started investing a lot more in things like threat modeling and proactive security, simply because they realize that they have so much data coming from tools like SAST and DAST and this sort of stuff. It's really impossible to manage. Whereas if you train people, or if you do threat modeling, these are two top loaded things that you do. It can result in much lower security issues down the road. And that's what they're looking for. And that's what you should think about this from that perspective, because it ultimately saves you a ton of time. And obviously, because it saves you a ton of time, it saves you a ton of money. So this is really what secure by design is all about. I think that's the objective here. The goal here is to optimize on resources and get you the most bang for your buck, right? That's really what I think it should do. The other thing that secure by design, especially the parameters that I've spoken to you about, helps you do is to get security visibility across the board, right? It's not just one person or one team. It gets you security visibility across the business unit, and because you do that, it results in better collaboration, better appreciation for security events. You get visibility right up to the board, especially if you start implementing the last stuff that I said. This is one of those things that can help you get to the next level in terms of collaboration and ownership. A lot of security people, especially product security and CISOs, the fundamental problem that they have is that, oh, you know what, my developers don't care about it, my engineers don't care about it, I don't care about security. But if by implementing something like this, where they have to care, not just have to care, they have more visibility into the issue, they also are more invested in the process. It's integrated into the KPIs, the OKRs, the decision making process by senior management. Then this becomes a lot more easy to get people to do, right? Or to get people to adhere to. And this over time becomes culture, right? I've seen this in many of our customers. While it's not necessarily always called a secure by design program, I've seen this where they've started off on this process once, and they've essentially had a continuing compounding effect that gives them positive results over time. So that is something that I've seen happen really in the real world. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I hope this was useful to all of you. Thank you so much for staying and watching. I see that most of you who started off seem to be there at the end. Thank you so much for being there. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. I have a few minutes. I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have. And then, so I've already answered a couple of questions. What does OKR refer to? If anybody else has any other questions, I'll be happy to take them. You can post them in the comments. I think people have already been doing that. Any questions? Just waiting for a few more questions to come in, if any. By the way, just to let you know, this presentation is going to be available on LinkedIn. It's also going to be We're also going to be sending this out to many of you who have subscribed. So, a question from Balraj Dahiya is, how to review the existing security in any organization? I think use the same lens, right? So basically use the same approach. First of all, start with a threat model, if you will. Create a risk assessment or a threat model, uh, and based off of that, you can define your what you need to review. Reviewing is not a checklist activity like, okay, I'm going to review this, then I'm going to review this. You have to review on the basis of what you have in the threat model. So I think have a threat model, review based on the threat model, review different aspects, all the parameters that I've discussed here, review those parameters again with the lens of the threat model, and you'll find that your review actually goes pretty solidly. And you actually do a pretty good review based off of that. So, the next question is, where can I get the document which is used in the presentation? So, this is the CISA Secure by Design document. You can just download this online. It's available to all of you. All right, I have another question from Abhishek Tyagi that says, how to ensure teams are using secure default libraries? Okay, good question. So teams, secure default libraries, so in terms of teams using secure default libraries, you need to probably do some kind of an analysis of that library. So typically frameworks nowadays, newer frameworks by default are secure default. The good thing is that they are. So if you're looking at, so let's say they say I'm using Java Spring Boot and I'm using Spring Security as part of that, you can be rest assured that at least 50-60% of the secure default library requirements are met right off the bat. There are a few things that can happen, but by and large, they are doing, it's pretty solid, right? Outside of that, so you can probably take parameters. Again, this is all parameterization, right? So how are you handling input validation? How are you handling cryptography? How are you handling logging? How are you handling access control? How are you handling authentication? So you take all the different security parameters that you want to test on and check whether the libraries are automatically default secure against them. So take these parameters, test them against the libraries, and then you will see whether they're secure default or not. What is the first step? So Nishant Shah asks, what is the first step you would recommend in starting the secure by design practice in a team? That's a very good question, actually. Good questions today. Anyway, the first thing that I would do in a secure by design practice is to first look at what is the current state, right? So, what is the current state of the secure of the practice? First of all, start off with, do you have a secure SDLC? Is the first question I would ask. So, a lot of times that itself needs to be implemented, right? So, you would have to implement some kind of a DevSecOps or secure SDLC practice where you're bringing in from the first step itself, you have certain things. So I would start from there and then start to branch out into other areas. But I would start from secure SDLC. So Abhishek Tyagi has another question. Can this be enforced security? For yes, it can. You can do static code analysis enforcement. You can do artifactory enforcement for supply chain security. You can do a lot of different types of enforcement. I have a question from Stephen Miles who asks, what parameters would you include in secure by design board reports? Okay, this is also a good question. What parameters would you include? I would include things like, first of all, we again just as a in the board, I would not just take. I would include things that make sense to the board, right? So things like numbers make sense to a lot of the board. So we were able to cut down account takeover things, resulting in these many users compromised or this kind of dollar loss because of our secure by design, and it resulted in savings of X number of X million dollars or whatever it is. Right? I would take the highlights to them, not the whole thing, simply because uh, again, getting too technical with the board is kind of pointless. They're not going to get it. The focus should be on speaking in their language. Speaking in their language directly refers to things like revenue or other parameters that they appreciate, as user retention or reputation parameters, things like that. I would focus on those. So I have several questions today. As an AppSec engineer, how to choose which third-party tools to use in DevSecOps practices? This is a slightly expansive question. I'll try and answer it the best I can. So third-party tools really, it depends on the stack that you have, right? So the kind of language that you're using, the kind of deployment environment that you're using, the tools that make sense for that is the only thing that makes sense for that. So you have to, again, there needs to be some research done to identify what are those tools, what are the potential issues for the tools, what are the limitations, but really the idea should be, what is the stack? Ask yourself that question first. Do you have all elements of the stack? Do you understand all the elements of the stack? That is the first question. All right. So another question from Jamil Ahmed, who asks, how to enforce that developers should not allow insecure practice, secure libraries used or not. So this can be done with static analysis. Again, you can do it with something like SemGraph. I do it with SemGraph all the time. I just essentially have, okay, is somebody using this, or is somebody not using this particular library to do this operation? That is something that you can do, right? That would be something you can do. You can also do secret scanning and stuff like that, but really I would focus on using static analysis to enforce this. Mahalingam has a question. What would be your take on using tools for threat modeling activities? Would you suggest it manual interactive session with authority or tool based? It really depends on the tool. If the tool can, I think it still has to be a little collaborative, but a tool can help you speed it up. The tool cannot be something that you use uh, just as a single person doing it. I think a tool should be collaborative, and it should still be collaborative, but a tool should help you speed things up. That's what I mean by using a tool. I have a question from Zubaid, who asks, how can I effectively communicate the value of secure by design to top leaders, particularly C-suite executives who may not fully understand the significance? How do I convince them to prioritize? Again, I think the answer is something that I kind of answered before, but let me again kind of reframe it for you. So what I would do is focus on uh, either breaches that have happened in a similar industry. That would be one example. Second is the value of secure design. By doing this, essentially saying, giving them metrics that translate to money terms. Right. I think that's the best. So by doing this, we can decrease our user account takeovers by 60%. As a result, we are saving X hundred thousands in revenue or X millions in revenue. That kind of stuff, right? You have to find a way of coming up with those numbers. Yes, some of those numbers might be a little notional, and they are. A lot of times they are, right? And but the idea is that you identify based on real world statistics that, okay, this is the kind of thing that is happening. This is the kind of breaches that are happening. This is the kind of value for user identity. So this is, by doing this, we can save X or we can save Y. By doing this, we can essentially reduce spend on Z. We can reduce spend on cloud security this, or we can reduce spend on something else. We can make it more effective. That sort of stuff. Speaking in money terms makes the most sense, in my view. How would you suggest a verdict on what lib modules to import in our web application as they can be insecure? So one of the things you can do here is uh, in terms of what lib you can use, you can look at tools like Scorecard from the Open Source Security Foundation. They have a tool that can essentially tell you that this is the library that you're using. The library has this reliability, security score, stuff like that. That may be one way of going about it. You also have to scan for it for actual security issues. So that's another thing that you have to do. So scanning a library for reputation and security issues is something that I would do to figure it out. You mentioned introducing security at early stages of the SDLC. Apart from threat modeling, what can be done at the SDLC plan phase? Any resource you can suggest or refer? At the SDLC plan phase, it's really more about threat modeling and tabletops and stuff like that. Again, tabletops will also come a little bit later, I would think. I would say threat modeling and creating security acceptance standards, right? Essentially, to say that you have threat modeled for this feature, this is what is accepted from a security perspective. So that is something that you would do, you could do. This is the last question, but unfortunately, I don't have this. Do you have a sample money matrix? No, I don't. Why don't you look at Octave? So Octave is this risk assessment framework that kind of gives you an impact analysis. That's kind of nice. You can probably take ideas from there. All right, folks. Thank you. That was a lot of questions. Thank you very much, folks. It was very useful to see a lot of people engaging. Thank you so much for engaging, and have a good rest of your week. Tomorrow is going to be the end of the week. Have a good rest of your week. And if you're at Black Hat and I'm around, please come and say hi. I'm going to be walking the floor on 7th, but I'm going to be training from 3rd to 6th. Uh, I'm looking forward to meeting all of you. Thank you so much, Zubair. So are you. Thanks for all the questions. Thanks for the interactions, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye bye.